There was a time when every American kitchen smelled like comfort and curiosity, when dinner wasn't just food, but a story shared across the table. From bubbling casseroles to gleaming gelatin molds, each dish carried a promise of home, hope, and a little mid-century magic. But somewhere between convenience and change, we lost them. Recipes once written in looping cursive, tucked inside church cookbooks and clipped from glossy magazines, began to fade away, one by one. Tonight, we're opening that time-worn recipe box again. Inside, we'll find bacon-wrapped meatloaf crowned with a golden pineapple ring, the dish that made weeknights feel like celebrations. We'll taste pumpkin spice chiffon cake, as airy as the optimism of the 1950s. And we'll uncover green pea mold with cheese layer, proof that creativity once had no limits, not even in a salad. Each recipe tells a story of its era, the post-war homemakers who turned simple cans into comfort, the bakers who dreamed in chiffon, and the families who gathered, laughed, and prayed over meals now forgotten. These aren't just recipes, they're time capsules, sealed in flavor, memory, and nostalgia. So grab your apron and step into a kitchen where the radio hums softly, the oven glows warm, and every bite tells a forgotten story of America. This is America's Lost Recipes, and tonight, we're bringing back 14 dishes that once ruled the dinner table, and then mysteriously disappeared. At first glance, it looks almost ceremonial, a glistening loaf wrapped in strips of crisp bacon, crowned with a golden pineapple ring. But this is not just a meal, it is a story of innovation, pride, and the forgotten glamour of mid-century America. The meatloaf itself has ancient roots, a humble mixture created to stretch precious meat and feed many. By the 20th century, it had become a symbol of comfort and thrift. Yet somewhere in the 1950s, home cooks began to dream bigger. They wrapped the loaf in bacon for richness, brushed it with tangy glaze, and placed a ring of pineapple on top. The result was astonishing, smoky, sweet, and unapologetically bold. Pineapple had just entered the spotlight as a modern miracle ingredient, adding a tropical note that felt new and exciting. Combined with bacon's savory intensity, it created a dramatic contrast that made this dish the centerpiece of countless mid-century gatherings. Magazines praised its showpiece quality, and cookbook pages displayed it like edible art. But as food trends shifted toward lighter, faster meals, this extravagant loaf quietly disappeared. Its flavors were considered too rich, its presentation too indulgent for changing times. What once represented celebration slowly became a relic. Yet today, when it returns to the oven, that sizzling sound tells a different story of creativity, optimism, and a nation that once believed every dinner could feel like a special occasion. The bacon-wrapped meatloaf with pineapple ring may have vanished from modern tables, but its spirit endures, reminding us that even in simplicity, there was once extraordinary imagination. Imagine a cake so light it seemed to float off the platter, dressed in autumn's warmest spices and layered into a towering statement of elegance. That was the pumpkin spice chiffon layer cake. In its heyday, this dessert was not just a sweet ending, it was the grand finale of mid-century celebratory dining, a confection wrapped in optimism and innovation. The chiffon cake itself emerged in the late 1920s, invented by a creative caterer who kept the recipe secret for years. By the 1950s and 60s, home bakers embraced the format for its airy texture and modern appeal. Layer that chiffon with pumpkin puree and warming spices, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and you had something both familiar and forward-looking. Why did this cake capture a moment? Because it met a demand for desserts that felt festive, sophisticated, and light, after years of rationing, frugality, and tradition. It spoke to families who wanted their sweet treats elevated. Yet over time, the very elements that made it special, the layers, the meringue-like texture, the showpiece height, became too elaborate for simpler, faster-paced kitchens. Now the pumpkin spice chiffon layer cake lies quietly in the shadows of cookbooks and vintage magazines, a relic of an era when baking was an event and dessert a performance. What will it take to bring it back into the light? As we uncover its story, its techniques, its seasonal magic, you will see that this cake is far more than fluff and spice. It is a symbol of culinary hope, creativity, and a lost feast of another time. Stay with me, because next we will dive into its origin, its delicate crumb, the secret that made it rise, and the reason it slipped from view. The table is set. Let us revive this forgotten masterpiece. From the moment the oven door opens and the aroma of sizzling bacon and sweet corn fills the room, you know this is no ordinary side dish, it is a relic of time. The creamy corn and bacon casserole with pimento emerges from an era when simplicity met presentation, when a casserole dish could claim its place at the center of the table. Corn, once the everyday vegetable, is transformed here into velvet-smooth whimsy. Bacon adds the crackle of indulgence. And pimento, tiny red peppers tucked into cheese and corn mixtures, speaks of mid-century innovation and convenience. The casserole genre itself exploded in the 1940s and 50s as home cooks embraced one-dish bakes that could feed a family and please a guest. In this dish, corn, often canned or frozen, was paired with cream, cheese, bacon, and that distinctive pimento hue. The red pepper was a pop of color that said modern and festive. Pimento cheese, for its part, became a beloved Southern spread early in the 20th century. And yet, this casserole faded. Why? Because taste shifted toward lighter fare, convenience morphed into ready-to-eat packaged meals, the showy side dish lost ground to speedy mains. The once vibrant red flecks of pimento became overlooked. The bacon crust that cracked under the fork was replaced by simpler toppings. Bringing it back now is a decision to revisit an era when every dish told a story of home, resourcefulness, and visual flair. This is more than corn in cream. It is the sound of a timer dinging in the kitchen of yesteryear. It is the laughter of voices gathered around bubbling dishes. So stay with me, because next we uncover how to layer texture, color, and tradition, how to revive corn, bacon, and pimento into one unforgettable bite. Picture the oven timer ticking down and the aroma of roasted coffee beans weaving through the air, then the moment of reveal, a delicate cakelet inverted to show its glossy caramel top, marbled swirl of coffee and vanilla batter shining like a hidden secret. This is the coffee marble upside-down cakelet. It may seem playful, but it once served as a symbol of innovation and finesse on mid-century dessert tables. Upside-down cakes themselves first appeared in American newspapers in the early 1920s, initially made with prunes, then evolving with canned pineapples and other toppings. The marble cake, swirled vanilla and coffee batter, was likewise a mid-century favorite, signifying a step away from plain sponge towards visual flair. When these two came together, the result was small cakelets designed to dazzle. The caramelized bottom crust became the top when flipped, coffee tones met vanilla lightness, and each portion looked like a miniature showpiece. But why has this delicacy faded? Perhaps because dessert trends moved toward larger cakes or simpler portions. Perhaps because coffee-flavored sweets fell out of fashion in favor of fruit or chocolate. Yet in reviving the cakelet, we restore something more than a recipe, we restore ambition, theater, subtle boldness in everyday baking. As you imagine serving this little inverted marvel, consider how each swirl, each caramelized edge, tells a story of a kitchen that celebrated texture, surprise, and presentation. The coffee marble upside-down cakelet may have slipped into obscurity, but today we bring it back into the light. Stay tuned, because coming up we'll dive into how to swirl the batter just right, get that glossy caramel top, and understand the cultural shift that made this once chic dessert vanish. When you unroll this luxurious dessert, the layered swirl of banana sweetness, oozy caramel, and crunchy nuts commands attention. The caramel banana roll with nuts was once the crown jewel of after-dinner indulgence, bold, visually striking, and deeply rooted in the mid-century pursuit of something special at the table. The roll format, often a sheet of cake or sweet dough spread with banana puree, caramelized sugar, and chopped nuts, typically pecans or walnuts, became popular because it spoke to motion and reveal. One unroll and the surprise inside was a symbol of cleverness. While I found no definitive first recipe for exactly this dessert, the trends align. Banana-based sweets rose in popularity as overripe bananas were repurposed during economic strain, and caramel nut toppings signified luxury. Why did this dessert fade away? Possibly because the roll format lost ground to more convenient slices or loaf cakes. And the nuts and banana combination, once seen as rich and modern, became overshadowed by purely chocolate or fruit-centric desserts. Yet imagining the roll still gives us a window into a kitchen culture where dessert was performance, not mere afterthought. Let us think of that moment, the fork slicing into the caramel-glazed top, the banana scent rising, the crunch of nuts and the soft roll giving way. This is not just a recipe, it is nostalgia wrapped in sweetness and texture. Reviving the caramel banana roll with nuts means reclaiming a time when dinner ended with flourish and imagination. Stick around, because next we will uncover the exact steps that made this roll special, the right banana ripeness, the caramel technique, the nut choice, and the reason this elegant dessert once held the spotlight. When the echoes of wartime still lingered and families searched for warmth beyond their fading rations, a humble dish quietly stole America's heart, the ham and potato scallop. It was not born in grand kitchens or glossy cookbooks, but in ordinary homes where resourcefulness met love. Thin slices of potato, bits of leftover ham, and a creamy white sauce came together to form something greater than the sum of its parts, comfort reborn from simplicity. Each layer told a story. The first, of thrift, where every scrap mattered. The second, of tenderness, as mothers stirred the sauce until it shimmered. And the last, of togetherness, when that bubbling casserole finally reached the table, its scent filling every corner with promise. The golden crust crackled softly as spoons dipped through, unveiling creamy layers bound by butter, milk, and faith in better days ahead. Old recipe cards sometimes called it scalloped ham delight, a name that carried hope. The dish secret was never just in its ingredients, but in the patience it demanded, slow baking, gentle layering, and that quiet wait as hunger met anticipation. Today, this forgotten casserole feels like a message from another era, reminding us that comfort does not come from extravagance, but from care. It is a recipe that turned leftovers into legacy. So, the next time you hold a few potatoes and a slice of ham, think back to that golden casserole that once fed America's spirit, proof that even in modest times, flavor found its way home. There was a time when a single slice of cake could tell the story of an entire generation, and few told it better than the pumpkin spice chiffon layer cake. Born in post-war America, this dessert captured the country's yearning for lightness after years of rationing and restraint. It was airy, fragrant, and elegant, a symbol of optimism baked into every golden layer. Unlike the dense butter cakes of decades past, this chiffon creation relied on oil, beaten egg whites, and pure pumpkin puree, an innovation that made it impossibly soft, almost like a whisper on the tongue. Housewives clipped the recipe from glossy magazines, boasting that nothing beats the new chiffon texture. But behind the sweetness was something deeper, a quiet cultural shift, as America embraced modern ingredients and electric mixers with pride. The aroma of nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves carried through suburban kitchens every autumn, signaling the start of gatherings and gratitude. The cake's satin-smooth frosting, often tinted with a warm caramel hue, glistened under the soft glow of linoleum-lit dining rooms. Each slice was a promise that simplicity could still feel like celebration. It was not just dessert, it was an emblem of progress, optimism, and newfound ease after hardship. Today, the pumpkin spice chiffon layer cake stands forgotten, tucked between fading pages of 1950s homemaker cookbooks. But if you bake it again, let it remind you, this was America's taste of hope, soft, spiced, and impossibly light. So, before you scroll away, hit subscribe to rediscover more flavors that time forgot, because every recipe here has a story that deserves to rise again. Green pea mold with cheese layer. It was the dish that made dinner guests pause, not in confusion, but in awe. The green pea mold with cheese layer was one of mid-century America's strangest obsessions, bright, jiggly, and unapologetically proud of its pastel glow. It shimmered on glass platters, crowned with grated cheddar or whipped cream cheese, daring you to take a bite. In the 1950s, gelatin was not just dessert, it was art. Post-war innovation brought powdered gelatin to every pantry, and homemakers transformed it into edible sculptures. The pea mold, often mold in ring shapes, was the centerpiece of bridge luncheons and Sunday buffet. Its vibrant green color, sweet creaminess, and sharp cheese contrast reflected an era intoxicated by novelty and convenience. But beneath its quirky exterior lay a deeper story, the American pursuit of progress through food. Housewives proudly used canned peas and processed cheese, symbols of modern efficiency. The dish represented a moment when texture and presentation mattered as much as flavor. Cookbooks of the time described it as elegant and light, though many later generations called it oddly charming. Today, it is a lost relic of the gelatin age, a conversation between curiosity and creativity. Cutting into that wobbling emerald ring felt almost ceremonial. The first slice revealed creamy layers that wobbled but held strong, much like the optimism of the age that birthed it. So, as you look back on this curious piece of culinary history, remember, not every recipe survives because it is perfect. Some endure because they dared to be different. And if you love unearthing America's forgotten flavors, subscribe, because this was only one of many strange, beautiful dishes that once ruled the table. Turkey tetrazzini surprise bake, 300 words. There was a time when opening the oven door felt like unveiling a miracle, and few dishes captured that feeling quite like the turkey tetrazzini surprise bake. Its story began in the early 1900s, named after an Italian opera star, Luisa Tetrazzini, whose fame inspired American chefs to create a pasta dish elegant enough to sing about. But by the 1950s, it had transformed into something new, a creamy, casserole-style comfort food that turned Thanksgiving leftovers into luxury. Imagine strands of spaghetti tangled in a velvety sauce of cream, sherry, and mushrooms, baked beneath a crust of breadcrumbs that crackled like applause. For many families, it was more than just dinner, it was a second act for their holiday turkey, reborn with every spoonful. Cookbook editors called it the smart homemaker's encore. The surprise was not only in its flavor but in its transformation, how something once fancy and foreign became pure American comfort. Housewives loved its efficiency, children loved its creamy warmth. It was thrift disguised as indulgence, and that was the genius of mid-century cooking. But over time, as convenience foods faded and tastes shifted, turkey tetrazzini quietly vanished from dinner tables, its once proud name reduced to a whisper in vintage recipe cards. Today, this forgotten bake tells a different story, one about resilience, reinvention, and how even the simplest leftovers can feel like a celebration when crafted with heart. So, if you believe food carries memory, hit subscribe, because dishes like this one remind us that every forgotten recipe once had its moment to shine, and maybe it deserves one more. Date and walnut squares with cream cheese icing. Before chocolate brownies ruled the bake sales, another square once held America's heart, the date and walnut bar. Sweet, nutty, and delicately spiced, it was the quiet favorite of 1940s and 1950s kitchens. Housewives baked it not for glamour but for comfort, a dessert that felt like a warm letter from home. Dates were once considered an exotic luxury, their sticky sweetness imported from faraway places. During the war years, they became a pantry treasure, one of the few ingredients that brought richness when sugar and butter were scarce. Combined with chopped walnuts, they created a bar that was hearty yet refined, chewy yet soft, every bite bursting with nostalgia. Then came the creamy twist, a layer of whipped cream cheese frosting that transformed these simple squares into something almost decadent. Old recipe cards called them company bars, because they looked elegant enough to impress but were humble enough to share. Their story is one of endurance. Through decades of changing desserts, from gelatin salads to lava cakes, the date and walnut square remained a symbol of homemade warmth. It carried the spirit of small-town gatherings, of aproned hands dusted with flour, and of ovens that never rested. Today, the recipe sits buried in faded cookbooks, its sweetness nearly forgotten. But when you taste it again, the soft chew of dates, the crunch of walnuts, the tang of cream cheese, it feels like remembering a song you thought you lost. Because sometimes, the most ordinary desserts are the ones that stay with us longest. If you love uncovering forgotten flavors like this, subscribe, and together, we will bring back the recipes that once tasted like America's heart. Broiled lemon meringue puff cake. There was a time when desserts were more than sweet endings, they were performances. And the broiled lemon meringue puff cake was pure theater. The moment you set it beneath the broiler, something magical happened. Clouds of whipped meringue caramelized to a golden crown, concealing a lemon-scented sponge so light it almost vanished on the tongue. This forgotten wonder first appeared in mid-century homemaker cookbooks, a dazzling cousin of the lemon chiffon. Housewives adored it not just for its taste, but for the drama, watching sugar and egg whites transform into burnished peaks of gold. The broiler was their spotlight, and this cake was the star. Its creation spoke to an era obsessed with lightness, chiffon cakes, soufflés, and whipped textures that mirrored post-war optimism. The tang of lemon zest cut through sweetness like sunlight after rain, and the scent alone could fill a kitchen with joy. It was both delicate and daring, easy to ruin, impossible to forget. But over time, this recipe slipped away. Modern desserts grew simpler, sweeter, heavier, and the art of broiling meringue for beauty's sake faded from memory. The puff cake disappeared quietly, leaving behind only whispers in vintage magazines and scorched recipe cards. Yet, when you recreate it, the past returns in every golden swirl. Each bite carries the elegance of an age when dessert was meant to impress and delight, not just satisfy. So, if you crave a taste of America's edible elegance, of a time when baking was performance art, subscribe. Because recipes like this remind us that beauty, once lost, can always rise again, just like that golden puff beneath the flame. Cheese and olive ring around the table salad. It was not just a salad, it was a showpiece. The cheese and olive ring around the table salad once stood proudly at America's mid-century luncheons, a shimmering crown of creativity molded from ambition, convenience, and color. Housewives in the 1950s adored its elegance, a circular gelatin ring filled with chopped olives, shredded cheese, and bits of celery, gleaming like stained glass under the dining room light. This dish belonged to an era that worshipped presentation. Gelatin molds were not humble sides, they were conversation starters. Magazines described them as modern marvels, symbols of refinement in the age of refrigeration. And this one, with its sharp cheese, salty olives, and creamy mayo base, offered the perfect balance of savory and spectacle. But beneath its glossy surface was a story of cultural transformation. Post-war America was experimenting with canned goods, processed cheese, and instant gelatin, ingredients that promised progress. The ring around the tables was more than a salad, it was a vision of modern living, the pride of a generation discovering how science could meet the dinner plate. When it was served, spoons cut through the quivering form, releasing a tangy aroma that mixed novelty with nostalgia. Some loved it. Some pretended to. But everyone remembered it. Over time, it vanished, mocked by newer generations, forgotten in yellowing cookbooks. Yet, today, it feels oddly poetic, a reminder of how the pursuit of beauty shaped even our food. So, if you believe the story of American cooking is about courage as much as comfort, subscribe, because this is how we rediscover a nation's taste for imagination, one shimmering ring at a time. Apricot almond icebox cake with whipped layers. Long before no-bake cheesecakes filled grocery aisles, there was a dessert that defined effortless elegance, the apricot almond icebox cake. Born in the 1930s and perfected through the 50s, it was a refrigerator miracle that turned humble pantry ingredients into something dreamlike. The Icebox, America's earliest refrigerator, inspired a new generation of desserts that needed no oven. Housewives, pressed for time but hungry for sophistication, layered sponge cookies with whipped cream, crushed apricots, and toasted almonds, letting the cold air work its quiet magic overnight. By morning, those crisp layers had softened into a tender, velvety cake that sliced like silk. Its appeal was simple but profound, no heat, no fuss, yet a flavor that felt luxurious. The tang of apricot cut through the cream's sweetness, while the almonds added a whisper of earthiness. Every bite tasted like summer preserved in time, bright, cool, and perfectly balanced. In an age obsessed with convenience and beauty, the icebox cake became a symbol of domestic mastery. It was the dessert of bridge clubs, Sunday teas, and handwritten recipe swaps between neighbors. Yet as modern refrigeration evolved and instant mixes took over, the art of slow layering faded away. Today, the apricot almond icebox cake remains one of America's gentlest culinary ghosts, elegant, quiet, and waiting to be remembered. Recreate it once, and you will understand why generations treasured its cool, creamy charm. Because sometimes, the sweetest recipes are not baked at all, they are built with patience, care, and time. If you crave stories like this, recipes that whisper of a slower, softer America, subscribe. Together, we will bring these forgotten layers of flavor back to life.